we meet in an hour of change and challenge, in a decade of hope and fear, in an age of both knowledge and ignorance. If this capsule history of our progress teaches us anything, it is that man in his quest for knowledge and progress is determined and cannot be deterred. Because that goal will serve to organize and measure the best of our energies and skills. Because that challenge is one that we're willing to accept, one we are unwilling to postpone, and one we intend to win.
We're here today with Brandon Hurlbut, the co-founder of Boundary Stone Partners and Overture VC. Brandon, welcome to the show.
Well, great to be here, Brian. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, we're really excited to learn a little bit more about you, all your different ventures, and talk a little bit more about energy. So how about let's start off with the basics. Tell us about yourself. Where did you grow up? How did your interests start to align where you are today?
Yeah, I grew up in Chicago. Spent the first 25 years of my life there. Went to University of Illinois, and then was really excited about politics. So my first job was the governor's race in Illinois, and I essentially worked for a lot of progressive candidates that ultimately lost. And then I sort of panicked and decided I had to get like a real job because my friends were starting to like have apartments with furniture and all this. And so I went to law school. So I went to DC. That's how I got to Washington, DC. I went to Georgetown Law Center. I got my law degree. I racked up a bunch of student loan debt. So I sort of panicked. And I went to a corporate law firm to try to start paying down that debt. And I did that for a couple of years. But then when Barack Obama announced he was running for president, I had met him back in Chicago when I was doing campaigns earlier in my career. And just like everybody else, saw the 2004 speech and was super excited. So I basically quit my job as a second-year associate at this law firm, packed my bags and moved to New Hampshire in early 2007. So I was one of the earliest hires on the campaign, took a big risk, I was finally making a little bit of money. I got rid of my IKEA furniture and I bought like a condo in DC. So I was giving like all that up essentially to go make very little money and chase this dream. And then, we won and I came back to DC and I mean, it was a magic carpet. I got to know him because I was in an early state, New Hampshire, went back to Chicago for the general election. So, saw both sides of that, being in a state, being in the headquarters, and then was on the transition team. And that's where I started to do energy and climate work. I was on the personnel side for the transition team for that area and got really excited about it. And then I started day one at the White House in cabinet affairs. I was the president's liaison to all the energy and environment cabinet agencies. And then I served in the administration I did the first year in the White House, then 4 years at DOE, spent a lot of that time as the chief of staff. And then after I departed the administration, started Boundary Stone, subsequently started Overture as well. And then when Trump won in 2016, my wife and I left DC in a month and moved to LA, where we've been for the last 7 years and will likely never leave.
That is an incredible journey, and as you said it, a magic carpet ride. Truly, it's a path that not many people have taken. Lots of different risks throughout that. But it has really paid off, and you've had an incredible career. I want to go back to a few things and peel back some layers. So in school, what did you study? Were you political science? Is that kind of what drew you to politics? Did you have an interest in something else that ultimately you kind of went back to, say, business or energy? Or how did that all start?
I did a political science degree. I also had, for a certain period of time, a double major with finance because my father told me that nobody ever hires a political scientist. So I did have some exposure to it on the finance side. I wasn't very good at it. But my passion really early was impact. Has always been impact. And I saw politics early in my career as the vehicle to do that. And so, having had some losses and dealing with that adversity, and then, the Obama campaign, it was incredible risk, as you said. I mean, when I joined, everyone thought Hillary Clinton was going to win that primary. She was the inevitable, candidate. People forget how hard that campaign was. That there were periods where we were down a lot and people really counted us out. So it was an amazing, I built lifelong friendships. Shomik Dutta is somebody I met early on the campaign and ended up being a groomsman in my wedding, where I met my wife on the campaign. And now Shomik and I co-founded Overture together a couple of years ago. So it created just so many fulfilling lifelong friendships, professional relationships. What people have done on that campaign in their careers is pretty amazing. We just had the Obama 15-year election day reunion in Chicago last November. So like 2 months ago, went back, and it was 3,000 of us. We all got together and it was an amazing celebration. We did a climate event there. It was like the only policy event. There were so many side gatherings, like the Iowa team got together, the communications team got together. So we did a climate policy, or just a climate, gathering, and it was like oversubscribed, sold out. Like people, like we didn't have enough room for everybody, and it was a huge hit. And it just shows like the power of what's happening in climate, how many people interested in this than used to be.
Yeah, no, I agree. I mean, more and more we're talking about climate than ever before. And that actually brings me to, so you started on the campaign. Was it someone that drew you or asked you to, start looking into energy and climate as a portfolio, or was it already an interest of yours that you said, hey, let me take this torch and run with it myself? Like, how did that actual start?
It's really like such an interesting confluence of it's just some things that happen in a career and where it can go. When I was a lawyer, my firm started working with Environmental Defense Fund in its early days. And so I got exposure to it as a lawyer, and it was my favorite thing to work on. And I started reading more about climate. This is back in like 2005, 2006, about the clean energy transition. And so when I had to submit, so we win on election day, right? And then you submit your resume to the transition team. And I included that work on my resume as a lawyer. And they're like, oh, he's done environmental stuff. Let's put him on the environmental team. And that's literally how it started. And then because I did it on the transition team, for personnel, with cabinet affairs, I got assigned to the environmental portfolio, which meant that I worked every day with the Department of Energy, the EPA, the Transportation Department, Interior Department, and Ag Department. So I was working every day between the West Wing leadership and those cabinet secretaries to implement the president's energy and climate agenda. And when I looked at those, it was a great way to get a platform view of the cabinet, and particularly those agencies and how they worked. And I was so excited about what was happening at the Department of Energy. Mm-hmm. I was more attracted to the innovation side, the technology development, making clean energy cheaper, rather than some of the more regulatory, like EPA side of it. And I really like Steve Chu and the team at the DOE. So after a year in the White House, I went over there to be a part of what they were doing.
Yeah. And speaking of DOE, I mean, you were there during some pivotal times, Fukushima, BP oil spill, some very major
Hurricane Sandy.
Yeah, exactly. So, how did you deal with those? How did it shape the way, you thought about climate, or, actually addressing some of the big issues that you've been doing now for the past decade?
It was a historic time to be there. One, because we had the Recovery Act, which was the president's energy and climate policy agenda in that first term. We had 90 billion across those agencies, and 30 billion increase in the DOE budget plus the loan program office. So I was there for helping Secretary Chu stand up ARPA-E. Worked closely with Arun Majumdar, who's like a genius and now running, the Doerr School of Sustainability at Stanford. Was a part of helping stand up Sunshot with Ramesh. Steve Chu, in the political world, people didn't really know him, but in the science technology world, he was like the Beatles. He attracted all of this top technical talent to come work for the Department of Energy, people that would have never come serve in DC, but they wanted to work with him. So I got this exposure to the amazing scientists and helped work with them to stand up those programs. I got to serve on the investment committee for the loan program office as the chief of staff. And so I got exposure to, that program had a lot of people that came out of, the financial markets collapsed, right, in 2007, 2008 there. And so a lot of talent, from the finance world came to serve in that loan program office. And so I learned how those deals got done, how they got structured, how to speak the language of like a cash sweep and the waterfall and all of that. So it was like getting an MBA of like hard knocks almost. So I really enjoyed that. And then those crises required me to collaborate with almost everybody in the industry in one way or another. Because we had to partner with utilities when we were trying to deal with Hurricane Sandy and get power back up in the Northeast, to Fukushima, working with like the national security side, intelligence side. So it was an amazing experience where I met and worked with so many people, which then allowed me to sort of go out in the private sector and combine, climate policy, finance, technology, and politics to address climate change, which is really what I'm trying to do with my career.
Yeah. So let me pull on that thread a little bit. So, it's the end of the Obama administration. You now have to look for another job or figure out what you want to do next. You come out of this and you start your own thing. What was the driving force behind that? You kind of mentioned some of it, but talk me through like how it came to be Boundary Stone, and what your initial goals and vision were for it.
I think what I learned in DC was that I'm actually an entrepreneur. My job as the chief of staff at the Department of Energy, his boss was the president. So as far as where you are on like the hierarchy, you're pretty high up. But I still felt like for most decisions, there had to be like sometimes dozens of other people involved. And so there was a lot of the bureaucracy I found to be very constraining to me. So I knew that whatever I did next, I did not want to go to some big corporate and replicate that sort of experience. I wanted to really harness my entrepreneurial energy. And I had a vision of how policy, technology, and finance and movement, political, culture, media could work together to address climate. And so that's why I started Boundary Stone. And not all those pieces were in place when we started it, because in 2013, I launched it that summer. We were coming out of the Clean Tech 1.0 hangover. So it used to say clean tech investing and people would like run away. It was like you were a leper. They wanted nothing to do with you. So the idea of like raising a fund at that time was like the worst possible time. So we tried some things that didn't work. But on the policy side as well, like the industry wasn't totally there yet. And so going to a company and saying, we can help you with engaging with the government. A lot of them were like, yeah, that sounds nice, but I don't have a budget for that. So it was an interesting time to start it. But we put our shoulder to the wheel and we grew it every single year, even the years under Trump, to now we have this incredible scale with over 100 clients, 50 people, and it's really become really amazing firm where so much like impact is happening.
Yeah, no, that's amazing. And for our viewers that don't or they're not familiar with Boundary Stone or Overture, can you just go into a little bit more detail about what exactly you all do? What kind of customers typically come to you all? What are they asking for? What are the end goals? Talk us through some of that.
Yeah, so Boundary Stone, what we really do is a couple of things. One is policy design. So for instance, we worked with the solar manufacturing industry to design the tax credits that ultimately became 45X because we were trying to help them make American-made solar panels as cheap or cheaper than the Chinese panels. And we felt like with the tariffs, that's actually not the greatest politics. Let's try to do this another way. And so our team helped design those tax credits. We do advisory, so we can just help people understand what is. So if you're a corporate or an investor and you're like, okay, there's the Inflation Reduction Act, there's the Bipartisan Infrastructure Law, there's Chips and Science Act. Like, what does this all mean? What's in it? There's so much. We help them understand that so that they can make informed decisions, better informed decisions. And then we do advocacy. So advocacy is like you're trying to get a bill passed, or you're trying to implement a program in a certain way. And so advocacy includes, there's a lobbying component to that. There's like direct contact with policymakers. There's strategic communications, developing the things that policymakers, that influences their thinking on certain issues, and then working with stakeholders, because you always want third-party validators and champions for your issue. So an example of this is, we worked with a thermal battery company, Antora, to help make sure that thermal batteries were eligible for the 45X tax credit, because a lot of these are new and they hadn't thought about all these technologies. So we were advocating to be as inclusive as possible, and give as many of these technologies a chance. Ultimately, thermal batteries made it into that 45X guidance. So that's really important. So Overture is a climate venture capital investment fund. We invest in early stage companies. We've raised $60 million. We have made 20 investments so far. We write checks for about $1 million. We're really at the seed, pre-seed. We can stretch to Series A. We don't lead, we only follow. We've co-invested with all the top climate investors out there. It's really impressive. And what our differentiator is when we make an investment, that portfolio company gets in-kind services from Boundary Stone. So many of these, early stage companies, they know there's all this stuff happening in DC, but they don't have a team thinking about it because they're early stage. They don't have those resources yet. So we can come in and help them develop their strategic plan around, okay, what are the opportunities with the US government, short-term, medium-term, long-term opportunities, and help, like we did with Antora. That was our first investment out of Overture. That is the type of work that we can do to help those portfolio companies engage with the US government. So founders, we get into the most hyper-competitive deals because founders see our capital as highly differentiated. Deals can be competitive, and so they're looking for something beyond just the capital, because they can get that from a number of different firms. And so they find room for us because they're really attracted to this government edge that we can provide.
I'm going to ask you two questions that could either be answered separately or they could be answered together, depending on how you look at this. So the first part is, through Overture, are there certain sectors of clean energy that you focus on more for investments? And the second one is, from the time you started Boundary Stone till, let's say, the end of 2023, what did you see as the biggest trends within the industry that you all were either getting asked for advice or lobbying help on? And the reason I think those might intersect is some of those trends might be where investment dollars are being put to today. But let's keep it, within the past 10 years, because I want to focus on the future a little bit later in the show.
Yeah, I would say, so both Boundary Stone and Overture sort of work with and invest with a similar profile of companies. We really do all sorts of climate tech. So Boundary Stone, we're working with companies that do power generation storage, clean transportation, building decarbonization, industrial emission reduction, same sort of profile with the Overture investment portfolio. Overture, we really don't do like food or sort of gov tech type stuff, but it's pretty broad. And I think, what we've seen over the last 10 years in the way that the CHIPS Act and the Bipartisan Infrastructure Law and the Inflation Reduction Act do kind of fit together it is sort of a comprehensive policy approach, which is that we are going to clean up the grid, right? We're going to, have a grid run on clean energy, 100%. And then we're going to run everything off of that clean electricity. So that can be buildings, heat pumps, electric vehicles, as much as we can. And then the last part of that is there's going to be some stuff that is hard to electrify, things like shipping, things like large aircraft, right? So that is why there's some shots on goal with funding towards like sustainable aviation fuels and things like that. And then there is, really the last part is we have to pull some carbon out of the atmosphere because we've already put too much in, right? So then you have some shots on goal on the carbon removal as well. So if you put those three big policies together, they're actually accomplishing those goals by paying these companies to make these clean energy products and then paying consumers to buy them, essentially. So that's really an industrial policy. And that is what we've needed in this country for a long time because China has been doing it. They've had an industrial policy on clean energy and climate tech for a while. And so now we're finally catching up to that. And when the United States gets in and goes big, we have proven that we can win it. And I think we can.
Yeah. So, speaking of China and just bringing in the international kind of arena to this, how much does that play into what you're doing through Boundary Stone, through Overture? It seems like you're focused very heavily on U.S. companies doing stuff domestically here to really, raise the profile of what the U.S. is doing and trying to make sure that we are leading globally. But there's plenty of partners that we have throughout Europe that a lot of our companies either have subsidiaries or are doing things throughout the world. Talk to me about the whole international landscape and how your business is and how you've been kind of involved in that with your clients.
Yeah, so Boundary Stone has been working with a European firm, Kaya, which is a similar firm, and they know the European regulatory environment really well. So we love that with the U.S. like historic climate policies that have been passed by President Biden and the Democrats, that now other countries like in Europe are looking at going, wow, we have to do something like that too. So there is this like race for government involvement to help accelerate this that is very inspiring. With China, with one of the differentiators at Boundary Stone is the business model for many DC firms is they write checks to PACs and it's access based and they can get you like a meeting with like a member of Congress. Our model is very different. We are based on like deep policy, substantive expertise. People at Boundary Stone have worked at the highest levels of the U.S. government or program managers that have implemented these programs from the DOE, the Department of Transportation, Commerce, State Department, the White House, the National Security Council. So it's deep, deep policy expertise. But we also have a political lens because you have to marry the two. So when you think about something like China, and this solar debate is very rich, right? You have this confluence of the developers want the cheapest panels possible because the margins are thin, right? And that's good for levelized cost of electricity. Like the lower we get this, the price of the modules being cheap is good for everybody. But China heavily subsidizes, and we're trying to match that. And so the developers need the cheap panels, but we also have a supply chain risk that we identified with the pandemic, national security risk. So we need to have our own marketplace here of domestic solar, panels. And so there's a lot of politics involved in that as well. And it's not always rational because the one thing that people can agree on in DC is that China, is competing with us and we want to be winning. And so there is a political lens you have to take approach that you have to take with some of these policy issues. And so we can really marry the two very well.
Yeah, that's great. And you actually hit on what I want to go to next. You said deep policy and program management is what Boundary Stone is really good at. And I know you've mentioned multiple times throughout how you've done that in your career. So let me ask you this. We just closed 2023. We just saw COP28 end. At COP28, we saw pledges to triple renewable energy by 2030, pledges to triple nuclear energy by 2030. How are we going to get that done? And what challenges do you think are going to be presented in order to try and do that?
The easiest thing would be to win in 2024, to be honest. I would love for this to be a bipartisan issue. I have co-hosted a podcast as well called Political Climate, where I was co-hosting with a Republican, Shane Skelton. We desperately want to work with Republicans. We have Republicans at Boundary Stone, but really only one party so far in this country has been committed to it. And if the Republicans take control of the U.S. government, the House, the Senate, and the presidency, we could see some cutbacks for sure. You saw this with the debt ceiling debate. I mean, the House tried to repeal the IRA, House Republicans. So that is something, the way to keep this going right now, unfortunately, and I think it's hard for a lot of people in the industry to get their heads around because many of the leaders want to be seen as above the politics. They may be libertarians at heart. They would like this to be bipartisan as well. They don't want to be seen as partisan because they may have interests in Georgia, where you have a Republican governor. But right now, like, we really need to win to protect all of these historic policy actions that the US government has taken, and we need to do more because unlike other issues, there is a shot clock on this one. And we all know 2030 is coming fast. And if we don't hit certain milestones by 2030, it gets really hard to hit the goals that we need. So we can't go backwards. We, in fact, need to keep accelerating. So a lot will turn. This is a consequential year for elections across the world. I think I read somewhere that there will be more people voting this year across the world than in any year until like 2048. Like Europe has elections, we have our elections. So there's a lot at stake this year.
Yeah, and those are all excellent points. I mean, history shows that, whenever an administration changes, what could potentially happen to good policies that are really have a lot of momentum and are moving forward that can come to a complete halt. But taking politics out of it, what from a, let's say, utilities or developer or even an investment perspective would you say are potential challenges or hurdles that we'll have to overcome to get to those goals that we want to hit before 2030?
Yeah, we're seeing incredible technology innovation. That's the biggest development that I've seen change in the last several years is, when I was getting involved in this back in 2006 as an attorney, and then those early years in the White House and the DOE, the quality of the deal flow that we see at Overture, and I'm also an operating partner at NGP, which is an energy transition growth equity fund, just see quality founders. The best and brightest, they used to go into like, how can I aggregate data and monetize it for advisors? Like people are going to Google and the Facebooks and all that. The best and brightest are going into this. I've actually seen in LA, one really development is SpaceX, where you have these incredible engineers, that like launched these rockets and landed them on that like pad back here on Earth. Many of them are now coming into climate tech. They're leaving SpaceX and they're bringing their brilliant engineering minds to develop top climate tech, technology companies. So I'm really excited and inspired by the founders, the entrepreneurs, and the innovations that we're seeing. I think what we need, so we've seen that the costs, unlike for 75% of the emissions, the costs are already at cost parity. And then you have, these historic climate policies that are accelerating deployments. There's all this money in the LPO and whatnot. This is all great. But I think to really get there, we don't have a regulatory system that matches the technology innovations that we're seeing. It's built for a different day. It's antiquated. And so when you're seeing these barriers to solar deployment, like the permitting, the interconnections, and all this, I think the sort of foundation of the problems are that we have 50 public utility commissions, 8 electricity markets. There is no FAA of the Northeast and an FAA of the Southwest. There is an FAA, I think we have to start thinking about, transparent, competitive markets. And right now it's very fractured. And the fracturing benefits incumbents. And so when you see things like virtual power plants, vehicle to grid, I think that they have a challenging path on the regulatory side because the way the system is set up, it was never designed to incorporate those type of things, a two-way, very dynamic grid. And in several areas of this country, we still have, you still have non-competitive marketplaces. So I think that is the sort of the next wave of what we need to do to get to hit these 2030 goals, is think about the system, and is it designed to capture these incredible technology innovations to scale quickly.
Yeah, I mean, what you described is a mix of challenges, a lot of which do go back to policy and politics. So it's important to make sure that momentum goes forward, because you are right. I mean, the entrepreneurship that's coming out, the SpaceX, I mean, that kind of goes back to what the space race produced, all the different technologies that spun out of what the space race was able to do with those engineers. We're in a pivotal place where we can continue that momentum, or we can regress, which has been done in the past. We definitely don't want to see that. But talking about another mix, the energy mix that we should see moving forward, we've seen lots of talk about renewables, nuclear being a part of that, geothermals now back in the conversation. What do you see as the future of the energy mix, and the best way to kind of approach those that are saying, oh, we only need this one type of energy source rather than a equitable, diverse energy mix to accomplish these goals?
I think it's going to be clean because you look at the numbers that solar's putting up, it's incredible. I mean, for now, the price of these modules are 10 to 13 cents per module. And so if we can get sort of the friction out of the system, there can be, the costs have been there for a while. So battery prices coming down, there was a little hiccup with the pandemic, but now they're back down to record levels. We're seeing a lot of deployments with batteries, and how those pair together. Long duration storage, companies like Form Energy, really excited about what they're doing, and the ability to have, the 100 to 300 hour, type of energy storage out there for the grid. So I'm very optimistic that we're going to see a very clean grid, and that we're going to be able to run many of our devices off of that. I mean, we essentially have several 100 million machines that run off of electricity that we need to just swap out for machines that run off of clean electricity, like heat pumps, electric vehicles, induction stoves, and all those products. The benefit of those products is that they can be cheaper, they can be healthier, less pollution in your home, and they can be just better machines. I mean, electric vehicle is a better drive than a fossil fuel car. It goes faster, it can handle better, there's less maintenance. There's so many just beyond the green and environmental benefits of these technologies. They're just better, and those will win out. And it's just like streaming versus DVDs, like Blockbuster went down because a better technology came along, like streaming. There's a graveyard of these. Kodak, invented digital film. Didn't want that to eat their business. They went down because the better technology won out. And so I'm optimistic that we'll have a mix of clean energy technologies on the generation side. We'll have storage, the ability to make that firm power. We'll have distributed assets that we can use more efficiently, in a two-way, very dynamic, flexible grid. And then there's the hard stuff, like we talked about with aviation and shipping and carbon removal. And that feels like those early days of solar, wind, and batteries back in 2009, 2010, where we don't know what's going to win out, but people are trying lots of things. We have a lot of smart people involved. The government is giving everybody a chance with some funding, and the winners will emerge.
Yeah. You mentioned electric cars and how incredible they can be. My first time in a Tesla, I was shocked at the acceleration that it has. I did not expect to be able to get that out of an electric car versus a fuel burning car.
They can't make the Ford F-150, the electric version, fast enough. There's a wait list. Like, there literally is so much demand for that truck. They cannot make them fast enough to meet the demand. And when people start using the batteries, in a creative way for their home, I think you're going to see some of these people that have different politics. They're going to, once they sort of touch and feel these technologies and see how much better they are.
Yeah.
They can operate a construction site remotely with their F-150 electric, that they couldn't do with their regular F-150. Like that is going to, I think, get more support for what we're doing.
Yeah. Short tangent, because you mentioned a company that's doing battery storage. For viewers that are not very familiar with where we are with the capacity of battery storage like me, how far off do you think we are with true, I understand Teslas can go hundreds of miles without being charged, but where are we now and how close are we to getting that true amount of battery storage needed for some of these long-term solar kind of goals that we need?
The batteries can do a lot. Lithium-ion batteries are the foundation batteries for your electric vehicle, and the range keeps getting, better. Now it's pretty standard when you buy an EV that you're getting, minimum 250-mile range, and most people don't drive that far every day. And the charging is getting better. You're now seeing like a single standard with everyone adopting the Tesla standard. So that makes it easier, because in the past it was like, wait, what plug, what app am I using? Just getting all that stuff standardized is happening. So it's making it an easier experience. And then there are some, technologies out there like solid state batteries that people are trying. I think that's all good. Let's not take anything off the table. And so right now, I think lithium ion is great for EVs, and if a better technology comes along, fantastic. And then lithium ion for grid storage, because they're so cheap, it's really helpful on that 4 to 6 hour storage and dispatchability. The question then is, that's not quite 24/7 firm power with only lithium-ion batteries. So now we're seeing these innovations with like Form Energy and others, thermal batteries out there. And Form's building a massive manufacturing facility out in West Virginia that like helped get Senator Manchin excited about the Inflation Reduction Act, and is creating some jobs in places where once people start getting these jobs, I think we'll build more political support for what we're doing. So, we're really excited about their progress on the technology, and they'll be deploying it and testing it soon. And so I don't think we're that far off from having the sort of holy grail where you can have this mix of like cheap solar power, 4 to 6 hour cheap lithium ion batteries, and then, some long duration storage that can create this 24/7 firm, clean power where you can function like a fossil fuel plant, but cheaper.
Yeah. No, that's great to hear, and much further along than I think I knew and expected. So you've spent most of your career advising people, advising companies. What's some of the most valuable advice you think you could give to those looking to accelerate the clean energy transition?
Yeah, I think what we've seen is the government is going to play a role in your business in this sector, regardless of whether you like it or not. It's a highly regulated industry, always has been. So if you're a clean energy or climate company out there, that has to be a part of the equation for you, because it can either be an opportunity that you can maximize and create an edge. It can also be a risk that you need to mitigate sometimes, but it's something that you really need to factor in. I've seen the government be an incredible partner in certain circumstances. When I was on the investment committee for the Loan Program Office, there was no utility scale solar in this country. There was no project, no plant over 100 megawatts. And the LPO was designed to take that first risk on a big deployment that a bank will not take. The bank will never do the first one. And so we did the first 6 utility scale solar projects with this government financing program. And then the government never needed to do another one because they proved it worked. And then Bank of America was like, we'll do this. And then now we have, a thriving private finance, vehicles for solar and wind deployment. So it's a great example of how the government can catalyze and get something off the ground, and the private sector can take it and really scale it. And so there are lots of those type of programs at the DOE. There is something for everybody, whether you're R&D to pilot, demonstration, commercialization, first of its kind factory, then like scaling the deployment with the LPO. There's a program along that spectrum for you. And so I think it's healthy for companies to factor this in. And then ultimately, the US is 18% of the emissions in the world. So even if we solve it all here, we got to solve it for the whole world. So these companies can eventually be making the products here that we can be selling to the world. It's going to be a massive marketplace, because that's what the Chinese figured out a while ago, and we're going faster than us. And so that is there's huge opportunity out there to do good, to have the impact that we need to solve this problem, and to create great investor returns and great companies and great jobs. There's a lot of win-wins out there for this, and so I'm really excited about the future.
Yeah, that's great advice. Public-private partnership, absolutely 100% key. So what's next for you, or Boundary Stone, or Overture? Anything you're really looking forward to in 2024?
Yeah, I mean, for Overture, we'll be closing the fund. We've already made 20 investments, but we'll be with the size of our fund, we'll be making another 20 or so. So if you're an early stage company, come find us. We're intellectually curious. We have capital. At Boundary Stone, we keep growing. I think we're going to start expanding into some other areas beyond the federal government. We know that there's so much action happening in California, New York, other states where they have big, ambitious, climate policies. And, I live in California. It's the fourth largest economy on its own in the world. So it's like its home country. And so I think we'll be looking at some other service offerings, and we'll be rolling some of that stuff out soon. So stay tuned for that news. And with NGP, we have a $700 million fund. So if you're looking for growth equity, and we write checks for like $20 to $50 million, come talk to me. I'll get you into the flow there as well. And I think we'll bring Political Climate back, the podcast. We've got an election year. There's IRA implementation. There's so much to discuss. So Julia has been on maternity leave, but she's back. So we're talking about getting that going. And then we've got the elections. So I'll be working on mobilizing our industry so we can protect these historic policies and keep moving forward. And there's a lot at stake. So I want to be helping organize that effort. So it's going to be a jam-packed year.
Jam-packed is an understatement. Lots to watch out for. You're going to be very busy. Everyone go listen to your podcast, Political Climate, when it comes back on. Very excited about that. Well, Brandon, thank you so much for your time. It was really great getting to know you more, learning more about Boundary Stone, Overture, all your other ventures and things that are going on. And we really appreciate your perspective.
Thanks for having me. I'll come on anytime. And maybe we'll do a joint, Political Climate, Energy Impact podcast together. We can do a mashup. But look forward to collaborating with you on anything that makes sense this year and going forward.
Absolutely. Well, thank you so much.
Our leadership in science and industry, our hopes for peace and security, our obligations to ourselves as well as others, all require us to make this effort, to solve these mysteries, to solve them for the good of all men and for the progress of all people.